$50,000. That's how much my son and his new wife tried to extort from me, just 1 week after they had humiliated me. They wanted me to be their personal ATM machine. They didn't know I had already pulled their forgotten inspection report and knew about every single crack in their foundation. When he screamed down the phone at me, I gave him only 4 words. Those 4 words shattered their new life and secured my future happiness. I'm Richard, and I'm 72 years old. For 5 decades, I was a top real estate inspector. I could spot a critical foundation flaw that would bankrupt a homeowner faster than anything. I retired to enjoy life and, most importantly, to help my only son, Mark, start his family. I had promised him $50,000 for their down payment, a substantial gift, my legacy. I had the check sitting on my desk, ready for the engagement party we were planning. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. If you're into true stories of betrayal, slick revenge, and karmic justice served cold, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You won't regret staying tuned for the dramatic conclusion coming up. The first sign of trouble wasn't a crack in concrete. It was a crack in respect. The engagement party date passed. Mark stopped returning calls. I called Sarah, Mark's fiancée, directly. Her tone was ice cold. "Oh, hey, Richard," she said. "Sorry, we've been busy. Look, we already had the wedding. It was last night. Just close friends. And yes, we bought the house without your help, Grandpa. We managed just fine." I felt the heat rush to my face. The check for $50,000 sat right there. They had not only concealed the most important day of his life, but the "we bought the house" line was a deliberate, arrogant rejection of my help and my sacrifice. The contempt in that single word, Grandpa, was corrosive. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about pure, unadulterated disrespect. They wanted my absence. My cold fury took over. 50 years in real estate inspection teaches you one thing. Every structure has a weakness. Mark was careless with details. If they bought a house quickly and secretly, they had made a mistake. A big one. My professional curiosity, mixed with a boiling need for justice, took over. I needed to find their weakness, the paper trail. I searched the public records database and found the address. 1422 Willow Creek Drive. It was a rushed, newly developed suburban tract, the exact kind of construction I used to warn people about. I immediately called an old colleague, Jimmy, who ran the clerk's office. I kept it brief. "Jimmy, I need a personal favor. Top secret. I need a full printout of all recorded documents, including preliminary inspection reports, for 1422 Willow Creek Drive. Today. Call it a final, unofficial retirement project." Jimmy owed me a big one. "Give me an hour, Richard," he said. The hunt had begun. I was Richard, the inspector, and I was going to find the flaw in their foundation. The moment I hung up with Sarah, the shame left me, replaced by an icy, focused resolve. Hurt? Yes. But I am an inspector, not a crybaby. When a structural weakness appears, you don't patch it with tears. You exploit it with cold, hard knowledge. I realized my son and his new wife, in their arrogance, had not just rejected a father's gift, they had laid a financial trap for themselves, and I was the only one who knew how to spring it. My wife, Eleanor, came into the study. She knew me well enough to see the switch flip from grieving father to professional threat. "Richard, don't do anything you'll regret," she warned. I looked at her calmly. Regret? What I regret is raising a boy who thinks respect is transactional. I'm not doing this for revenge, Eleanor. I'm doing this for clarity. They bought a house without a proper inspection. That's not a mistake, that's negligence. My revenge will be surgical, legal, and completely inevitable. I walked over to the safe and pulled out the old blueprints of our city's records office, a little something I acquired back in the early 90s when they were moving departments. I knew exactly where they kept the paper reports, the ones too old or too detailed to be fully digitized, including the initial building code documentation for every major development in the last 20 years. The Willow Creek subdivision was one of those rush jobs, built fast and cheap right before the 2008 crash, the kind of place where corners were cut on the most fundamental elements. My plan solidified. I wouldn't just look for a small defect. I would look for a legal vulnerability that would void their insurance and put them in violation of city code. If they had been in a rush, they likely overlooked or simply ignored an initial inspector's warning, trusting the developer's slick promises. Mark always skimmed the fine print. Sarah, I suspected, was focused entirely on granite countertops. The financial arrogance was the most repulsive part. They had publicly scorned my $50,000, only to call back later demanding money when their little secret exploded in their faces. I decided I wouldn't lift a finger to help them. I would let the structure of their own mistake collapse on them, literally and figuratively. The goal wasn't just to make them lose the money. It was to ensure they understood that ignoring professional expertise has real-world, devastating consequences. I would use my unique position, a seasoned inspector who knew the local legal loopholes, as my weapon. The next step was getting my hands on those papers, and Jimmy's call was due any minute. This wasn't personal. It was procedure. And procedures, when followed precisely, are unbreakable. The moment Jimmy, my old colleague, called, I was already in the car. He'd left a bulky manila envelope taped under a rusty old meter box outside the municipal office annex, a classic, untraceable handover from the good old days. The air was thick with the dust of old paper and bureaucratic neglect, and it felt like home. I drove straight back to my study. This wasn't just a document haul. This was the reconnaissance mission before the strike. The stack was massive. Purchase agreements, preliminary architectural reviews, lien clearances, and buried deep inside, the final pre-sale home inspection report, marked verified by buyer. I pulled on my reading glasses, the ones I'd worn for thousands of inspections, and felt the familiar surge of professional focus. Mark's report was a joke. He'd highlighted the superficial stuff: a leaky faucet, a loose railing, amateur hour. But I was looking for the red flags the builders paid extra to keep quiet. I flipped past the generic disclosures, past the signatures. Then I found it. A 3-page addendum titled Structural Integrity and Load-Bearing Assessment, Revised. This addendum detailed findings from the initial foundation dig. It stated that due to unexpected subsoil movement, a mix of clay and poorly compacted fill, the builder had to modify the original footing design. The original design called for 4-foot frost footings. The revised plan showed they only poured 2.5-foot footings, combined with a highly questionable enhanced perimeter drain system that the inspector clearly warned was insufficient for the soil type. The report specifically used the language, significant long-term stability risk, non-compliant with 2018 Code Section 4.2.b for this subzone. This wasn't just a defect, this was a fundamental, critical violation. The bank and the insurance company would have been given the clean summary report. But this detailed addendum was tucked away, easily missed by a rushed buyer. If the builder, or Mark, had signed off on this, they had legally assumed all liability for future foundation failure, and critically, they were in violation of the city's mandatory building code. That meant two things: zero insurance coverage, and the city could issue an immediate cease and desist, evacuate order. I put the report down, my hand shaking, not from age, but from the realization of the power I held. I didn't need to do anything illegal. Mark and Sarah had already bought a financial time bomb. All I had to do was nudge the timer. The trap was set by their own arrogance, and I, the betrayed father, now held the schematics. The document was one thing, but I needed visual confirmation. A seasoned inspector doesn't rely solely on paperwork. I needed to see 1422 Willow Creek Drive with my own eyes. This wasn't just revenge. It was confirming the execution of my strategy. I drove out the next morning, deliberately choosing the time when Mark and Sarah would be at work. As I approached the Willow Creek subdivision, the cheapness of the construction was immediately apparent. Identical stucco boxes lined up like disposable toys, minimal landscaping, and thin asphalt driveways already showing signs of cracking after only a few years. It was exactly the kind of fast-money, low-quality build I had warned Mark about for years. I parked a few streets over and walked, wearing an old, anonymous baseball cap. When I reached their house, a small, subtle detail confirmed everything. Most new developments have perfect, flat lawns. Mark and Sarah's front lawn, however, dipped noticeably near the northeast corner of the garage, the exact area where the revised structural assessment indicated unstable subsoil. I circled the back, pretending to check my phone while I visually scanned the exterior foundation wall. There, running from the ground line up towards a small kitchen window, was a hairline crack. It was thin, easily missed, easily disguised by fresh paint, but its specific diagonal trajectory told the whole story. It wasn't just cosmetic, it was a settlement crack, a direct result of the inadequate 2.5-foot footings failing to support the load on that unstable clay. This wasn't just an expensive repair, this was evidence. If that crack was visible on the exterior, it meant the integrity of the slab, and more importantly, the interior load-bearing beams were already compromised. It was only a matter of time, perhaps a heavy rain season or a significant temperature drop, before the movement became dramatic and undeniable. The house was essentially shifting, and Mark and Sarah were living inside a slow-motion catastrophe. I took a few discrete photos, capturing the dip in the soil and the hairline crack. I didn't need to break any laws. I just needed to observe what any competent inspector would see. I now had the full arsenal: the legal proof of code violation, the hidden addendum, and the physical proof that the violation was leading to imminent structural failure. I drove home feeling a chilling sense of control. They had been reckless with my trust and their future. Now, they were about to pay the price for ignoring the one man who could have saved them. I knew the bank or the builder would soon send a panicked letter about the defect, triggering Mark's call. I only had to wait for the fear to set in. After my visit to Willow Creek, the hardest part began: waiting. I knew the structural integrity of their house was failing, and I knew that sooner or later, either the builder's warranty department or their mortgage servicer would flag the issue, demanding immediate, costly action. Mark and Sarah had signed documents stating they were aware of the defect, nullifying any easy escape route. The next 7 days felt like 7 years. Eleanor was anxious. She kept asking if I had heard anything, her voice laced with the worry that maybe I was going too far. "Richard, he's still your son," she'd plead. I'd just nod and sip my tea, but inside I was detached, purely clinical. He stopped being just my son, the moment his wife called me Grandpa, and they tossed my $50,000 promise in the trash. He became a cautionary tale in negligence. I spent my time meticulously organizing the paperwork. The original code section 4.2.b, the revised structural assessment, and my own photographs of the settlement crack and the dipping yard. I stored it all in a file marked simply, The Remedy. I envisioned their days. I imagined Sarah trying to stage their new home, picking out curtains, completely oblivious that the floor beneath her feet was slowly, silently pulling apart. I imagined Mark, already stressed by the sudden responsibility of a mortgage and a new marriage, finding the inevitable official letter. The letter would be cold, legal, and demanding, the opposite of the warm, supportive help I had offered. It would probably demand a structural engineer's report and an immediate remediation plan estimated at tens of thousands of dollars. The silence was the most effective part of my revenge. I didn't initiate contact. I didn't threaten. I gave them space to fully realize the scope of their mistake on their own. Every day without a call meant the foundation was settling further. The problem was worsening, and the cost to fix it was rising. I was letting their financial hubris cook them slowly. On the 5th day, I saw a notification pop up on my desktop. It was an anonymous news alert from the local planning commission. Willow Creek developers issue statement on warranty repairs. The article mentioned routine maintenance, but the underlying panic was clear. Someone in that neighborhood was complaining, and the builder was trying to manage a PR disaster. It was a sign. My son's time was coming. The trap was about to spring. The call came precisely at 9:15 a.m. on the 7th day. It wasn't a tentative call. It was a desperate, panicked demand. The caller ID flashed Mark's name. I let the phone ring 4 times, just long enough to savor the fear and anxiety I knew was building on the other end. When I finally answered, I used a neutral, almost bored tone. "Hello, Mark. To what do I owe the pleasure?" His voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the casual arrogance, replaced by a frantic, high-pitched desperation. "Dad! Oh God, Dad, you have to help us. Please. The house. It's a disaster. We just got this letter from the bank and the developer. They need $50,000 immediately, or they're going to start foreclosure proceedings." He didn't even ask how I was. He just dove into his financial crisis. It was the purest confirmation of their transactional view of me. I wasn't a father. I was a lifeline they had arrogantly cut and now desperately needed to reattach. "Hold on, Mark. Slow down," I said, my voice measured and calm, in stark contrast to his hysteria. "Start from the beginning. What disaster?" He stammered out the story, confirming my predictions. They had received a notice about a critical structural failure, something about unstable subgrade, and a failed perimeter drain. They found a visible crack in the kitchen drywall, and the floorboards were uneven. The bank's letter stated that because the defect was noted in the initial pre-sale documents, the same documents they ignored, their homeowner's insurance was officially denying the claim for pre-existing, undisclosed code violations. They were completely exposed. They're calling it an immediate risk. "Sarah is hysterical, Dad. We need to hire an engineer, and then they need to dig up the entire side of the house to pour new footings. It's $50,000, easy. The bank gave us 48 hours to show proof of funds." Mark's voice cracked. "Please, Dad, you promised us that money. We need it now, or we lose everything. Our marriage is barely a week old, and it's already ruined." I listened patiently, letting him empty the full cup of his fear and guilt onto me. It was excruciatingly satisfying. He and Sarah were reduced from scornful homeowners to pathetic beggars, all because they thought they were smarter than the old man. I let the silence hang for a long, heavy moment before I finally spoke, ready to deliver the first phase of my surgical strike. After Mark's frantic demand, the silence on the line was deafening. He was waiting, breath held, for me to say yes, for me to offer the $50,000 he had so carelessly rejected a week earlier. I let him suffer for a few heart-stopping seconds. "Mark," I finally said, my voice low, making it sound as if I was struggling with the decision. "I hear the panic in your voice. I truly do. Losing a house, especially right after your wedding, that's devastating. But let's be real. $50,000 is a lot of money. I can't just write a check without understanding the full scope of the problem. You know that." I was deliberately stringing him along, giving him a glimmer of hope just to snatch it away. He immediately jumped on the opportunity. "Oh, it's terrible, Dad. You wouldn't believe it. They're saying the footings weren't poured deep enough and the soil is just shifting. We have to pay an engineer just to confirm what we already know. It's a huge liability. We have 48 hours, Dad. Please, just tell me you'll do it. Tell me you'll save us." His voice was choked with tears, a pathetic spectacle of the financial mess he had created. This was the key moment. I needed him to admit his own fault, to acknowledge the severity of the defect, not just the cost. "Mark," I asked, making my voice sound deeply concerned, "did you or Sarah read that extensive pre-sale document packet? Specifically, the one that mentions the soil instability and the revised structural report?" There was a long pause. He coughed, trying to regain his composure. "Dad, we signed a lot of papers. We were rushed. The developer assured us everything was fine. We trusted them. We were just so focused on getting the mortgage finalized, you know? Nobody reads everything." "Ah," I said, a dangerous calmness entering my voice. "So you signed a binding legal document stating that you reviewed and accepted a structure that had a known critical code violation, purely based on trust. Is that what you're telling me?" He was cornered. "Yes, exactly. We made a mistake, Dad, but you can fix it. You have the money. Please, I'm begging you. Don't let us lose everything." I had everything I needed. He had admitted his total negligence and confirmed the existence of the critical report, the report he assumed I had never seen and never would. I leaned back in my chair, the complete document file sitting squarely on my desk, and smiled. The time for pity was over. Mark's final plea, "Please, I'm begging you, don't let us lose everything," hung heavy in the air. He was completely vulnerable, stripped of his pride, begging the man he had scorned days earlier. It was a beautiful moment of pure, earned justice. I took a deep breath, consciously slowing my heart rate. This needed to be delivered not with anger, but with the quiet authority of an executioner. I needed to shatter his reality with maximum efficiency. "Mark," I began, my voice clear and devoid of any emotion. "Let me be perfectly clear about what you're asking. You're asking me to hand over $50,000 to cover a disaster that you and Sarah legally signed off on, a disaster that was clearly documented in the inspection report you claim you were too rushed to read." He started to interrupt, desperate to make another excuse. "Dad, we didn't know." I cut him off, my voice rising just slightly, but retaining its chilling composure. "You didn't know because you chose ignorance over respect. You threw away my years of experience. You chose an immediate, cheap solution over a sound professional opinion. And you rejected the one person who could have saved you from this mess." I paused for the fatal beat, letting the weight of my words sink into his mounting terror. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, waiting for the final verdict. Then, I delivered the line I had rehearsed in my mind for a week. The 4 words that confirmed his worst fears and proved that I held all the cards. I saw the report, Mark. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Total silence. Not a cough, not a sob, just the dead air of a man who suddenly realized he was caught. He knew exactly what report I meant. The confidential, revised structural integrity addendum. He knew I knew everything. "What do you mean?" he stammered, his voice a terrified whisper. Where did you see that?" "It doesn't matter how, Mark. What matters is that I know about the 2.5-foot footings, the unstable clay, and the non-compliant code violation that makes your house legally uninhabitable and voids your insurance. You don't need $50,000, Mark. You need a miracle. And frankly, you used up all your miracles when you decided to humiliate me instead of inviting me to your wedding." I didn't wait for his response. I simply said, "Goodbye, Mark," and I gently placed the phone back in its cradle. The silence in my study was glorious. The trap had sprung, not with a bang, but with 4 simple words. The minute I hung up on Mark, I felt a release, not of anger, but of extreme justified professional satisfaction. He was devastated, but my work wasn't done. 4 words had shattered his hope. Now, a single action would finalize the loss of his financial foundation. I immediately went to my computer, but I didn't contact Mark or Sarah. I contacted the City Planning and Inspection Department. I used an anonymous online tip form, a completely untraceable method, to report a serious, unaddressed building code violation at 1422 Willow Creek Drive. I didn't need to submit my documents, I just needed to tell them exactly where to look. My report was simple. Unaddressed, Code Section 4.2.b violation concerning inadequate footing depth and soil stability, resulting in visible structural settlement. Documentation is available in the Revised Structural Integrity Assessment from 2022, filed under the original developer's permit. I knew exactly what would happen next. When the city receives a tip detailing a specific code violation with documentation references, they must act immediately. Within hours, a city inspector would be dispatched. They would find the settlement crack I photographed, pull the specific report I referenced, and instantly realize the danger. The consequence for Mark and Sarah would be swift and devastating. An immediate evacuation order. Because the foundation failure was now officially flagged as a public safety risk and was pre-existing, as per their signed documents, they would be legally prohibited from living there. They would be forced to vacate the property immediately and would be issued a massive fine for failing to address a known code violation. The full weight of the collapse was now clear. They had no home, they had a huge municipal fine, and they still had to pay the mortgage on a property deemed uninhabitable. They had lost the $50,000 they had spent on the down payment, and they owed a fortune on a house that was now legally worthless. My revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, bureaucratic, and perfectly aligned with the consequences of their own reckless decisions. They were financially wiped out by their own hand, simply because they disrespected the one man who understood the fine print. I didn't give them a cent, but I ensured they received the full, unedited truth about their new life. The fallout from my anonymous tip was exactly as predicted. The city acted fast. Within 72 hours of my call to Mark, the yellow police tape was up at 1422 Willow Creek Drive. I didn't hear from Mark again, but Eleanor saw the evacuation notice online. The city had confirmed the structural integrity was compromised and issued a massive fine for the code violation Mark had knowingly signed off on. Mark and Sarah were now homeless, still married, and drowning in mortgage debt on a house they couldn't occupy or sell. They had lost everything they tried to build on a foundation of disrespect and arrogance. The cost of fixing the house was astronomical, far exceeding the original $50,000 I was prepared to give them. They never got a cent from me. Did I feel guilty? For a split second, maybe. But then I remembered Sarah calling me Grandpa, as she dismissed my life's work, and Mark's pathetic, transactional begging. They made their bed when they chose pride over prudence. My professional duty was to find the flaw. Their personal duty was to show respect. They failed both tests. Today, my life is peaceful. I used the $50,000 I had saved for Mark's down payment to buy a beautiful new RV. Eleanor and I have spent the last 6 months traveling across the country. We've seen the Grand Canyon, driven the Pacific Coast Highway, and enjoyed more freedom and genuine happiness than I have felt in years. I'm dedicating my time to photography, not inspection reports. My marriage is stronger, and my conscience is clear. I didn't ruin them. Their own hubris did. I simply provided the context. So, here's the question for all of you listening. Was I right to use my professional knowledge to expose my son's critical mistake and let him face the legal consequences, especially after they publicly disrespected and cut me out of their life? What would you have done in my place? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this true story of betrayal and calculated revenge satisfying, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next shocking revenge story. The end. Thank you for listening.